Alright guys, we are back, which means we're going to finish this shadow. Now, if you see the time on the top right, I actually took a whole day off in between recordings. And the reason is actually, there's three reasons why I take some time in between. The first reason is that I'm able to see things now differently the next day than I was earlier, just because you kind of look at something from a new set of eyes, and you see problems that you're kind of unable to see without being able to look at something all day long. You kind of get used to something. The second reason is last night I was recording basically in the dark in the studio, and now there's daylight outside, and that really affects what's going on with your image as well. Like, you see an image differently depending on how much light is in the room, and so you can see different things about it. And the third reason is I got a horrible headache last night. I didn't think it would be right to finish with you guys, so I'm feeling much better today, and I'm ready to finish this tutorial with you guys. And we're going to be making the shadow. It's going to be awesome. I've got some great techniques to do that, and let's go ahead and get started. So there are a couple things about, coming back and looking at this image, the color and things like that. They're not exactly right, but we did get them pretty close last night, so I'm pretty pumped about that. We're going to go ahead and fix these up a little bit more. Now, one thing that I do want to look at is the shadow levels. And you guys can see the shadows, not only are they getting too dark, but they're kind of in the wrong color, right? The shadows under her dress need to be really similar in color to the shadows on the floor here, because that's, the shadow color is affected by the light color, and the shadow color gets filled in by colors bouncing around the room. So rarely ever do you have black shadows. I think that's a big mistake that I see a lot of people do, is they make black shadows or dark gray shadows, and it's just usually not going to look right, because your shadows kind of need to be more on a color scale. So we're going to work on that too. And the other thing is, like, this window here, like that's basically exactly one of these guys printed down over there. So we need to take care of that. So our shadow, the first thing I want to do is work on our actual shadow levels. And I'm going to create, remember, we're using all these clipping masks. We're going to create another one of these guys, and I'm going to work on this shadow here. So I'm going to grab an adjustment layer. We're going to go up to curves, and I'm going to hit Option Command G again. That's going to clip that. So what I want to do is make this shadow color more similar to this. So if it's black or it's gray, I just need a little bit of red in it, maybe a little bit of green. So what we're going to do is go over here to our red channel, and I'm just going to click over here. Remember, the shadows are on the left, highlights on the right. If I take this guy and drag it to the right, it's going to make my shadows more towards cyan. If I drag it up, it's going to pull my shadows more towards red. And it's also going to lighten my shadows a little bit, which is what I need to happen. So we're going to lighten these up. There we go. And now we'll go over our green channel. And you don't have to get this right your first go round. Like, I almost never do get this right, just starting off, because it's very hard to do. But the cool thing about using adjustment layers is you can always change the opacity. You can always come back here and change them at any point in time. So don't worry if you don't get it 100% right from the get-go. That's not no one does that. Okay, so working with my shadow levels, we can see it looks quite a bit better here on the ground, and I think a lot of the shadow levels in the rest of the image benefited from that too. So that's one thing we're going to be looking at doing. Let me just invert my layer mask. I'm going to hit Command I to invert the layer mask, and I'm going to grab my white paintbrush and paint with a flow of about 20%, because I want this mostly to be visible there, and let's just put a little bit more on the face and areas like that. So Alt Option, let me click on this layer mask so you can kind of see what it looks like. That's basically just what I'm painting there. All right. There we go. And you can just kind of get a cool idea of what's going on there. Now, one thing that I want to show you guys, because we shot this on a gray backdrop, it should look decent if I if I just make the backdrop back visible again, which I can do by hitting Shift and clicking on my layer mask. There we go. And you can kind of see the colors of the backdrop. Let's just make all these invisible. The colors of the backdrop and everything, they do seem to reflect the colors that are in this image quite a bit better. So that's another thing you can kind of judge by the 50% gray there too. All right, let's make that invisible, and we're going to go in here and work on the shadow. Now, the layer mask for this original layer here, this is, shift click on this. The layer mask is a little bit too sharp. So what I can do is just kind of go in here on my original layer mask, and I can start painting with my paintbrush. Again, we're going to use the same brush, and I'm including this brush. It's just a soft 450 pixel brush, and I like my flow on the brush to be, somewhere between 10 and 20%. Flow basically means if you go over it a bunch of times, it kind of builds the effect up, and then opacity won't build an effect. It'll just kind of lay down what you have, and you have to lift your brush if you want something to be more opaque. But flow, you can just go back over and over your brush stroke, and you don't have to lift your brush in between strokes. All right. There we go. So I'm just painting like back and forth kind of between black and white here just to get a nice natural, a smooth transition between these two. There we go. And so you can see like there's the edge. So obviously you don't want that to be visible. So you paint black there and paint some white there and then come back in here with black again. You just want this to be pretty smooth, like a nice natural transition. All right, and we don't want this, the dress shadow to be too harsh, but you can see it's already quite a bit better than it was. We don't want it to be too harsh, and the reason is because it's not, it's not like a really hard light up here. It's a little bit softer than what was photographed with. All right, now looking at this guy again, like it's a little bit too much, right? Like that's probably a little bit too much. Maybe it's just too visible. So let's just lower the opacity down just a little bit. There we go. Cool. And you can see, like, I just flip these on and off, and if it looks right, if it looks better on than off, then it's good. And if it still doesn't look perfect, you can just lower the opacity or change your curves a little bit. Okay. Now, our shadow we're going to create underneath our model. And the key to shadows, guys, shadows are really, really tough. But there are a couple tricks that I have, and they're going to help you guys out. The biggest thing you can do is remember to do shadows in layers. So, like, if, let's just create a new layer, and I'll kind of show you guys what I'm talking about. If someone's standing, like someone's standing here, the best thing you can do is you can make a shadow that's like directly under that person, right? And then that's like the shadow that's, the core shadow, I guess you could call it. And then let's just hit Shift Command F to lower the fill opacity on this. I'm just doing this as an example, guys, but you have like another shadow that kind of goes out from there, and there we go. And then another one that goes out from there. So this type of shadow, like if you built a shadow in this way, like so it's darkest in the middle and goes a little bit wider and wider and wider, that's always going to look a lot better than if you just try to do it in one stroke, because shadows, like, they definitely build in intensity just like light does. They basically work the opposite of light. So that's a good way to do shadows. And let me just give this a little bit of a blur. I'm gonna just hit Gaussian blur. You can go to filter and then down to Gaussian blur. I've got a keyboard shortcut set up for a lot of these blurs and things like that I use a lot. And I'll show you guys how to set up keyboard shortcuts in just a second. So you can see even here, I mean, that's, it's not really anything at this point, but you can see it does work, a little bit better as a shadow than if I just had like one layer, just one little round thing there. So that's my advice on building shadows. We're just gonna delete that. If you do, by the way, want to build up keyboard shortcuts, like there are some things that I use all the time. So you can go to Edit and down here to Keyboard Shortcuts. And for instance, like blur, you can go to Filter, and down here you've got Blur, and I've got my Gaussian blur set to Option Shift Command G. So you can just click here and then hold down those three things and then hit G, and that'll be good. You got one for Gaussian blur. So anything you guys are using quite a bit, that's a good way to do it. Okay, let's go ahead and create this blur on her, and create the shadow on her. And normally I would create a shadow underneath a person, but since she's already got a little bit of shadow on her, like the layer that she's on, I'm just going to add to that, and that'll be cool. Okay, so I'm trying to think about how my light comes through here and how I want this shadow to be and all this sort of thing. And we're going to grab like a dark shadow color. There's something right about there, and I'm going to again change my flow to about 10%. And we're going to change our layer mode to darken. All right, because we don't want this lightening up. When I get out to here, we don't want it lightening anything, right? All right, let's go ahead and close my adjustment layers. We don't need to see those real quick. Cool, and I'm just going to kind of stroke in the way that, my shadow's going to go. And I'm just going to keep going kind of back and forth on this, spending a little bit more time close to the model and kind of spreading out from there. There we go. And if I need to, layer mask this away from her dress and other thing like that, that's not a problem at all. But we definitely want to be, making more brush strokes and things like that closer to the actual model. All right, very cool. Now I'm going to grab my eraser tool because the edge is a little bit it's not well defined enough. So I'm going to go in here with like my eraser tool and just define this edge just a little bit better. And remember, guys, we're working with relatively soft shadows here, so it's not anything that needs to be like super, you don't need the definition of her. It's supposed to be a soft shadow. All right, and I'm just going to lower the opacity. We're going to go with this again, and I'm going to make a new layer this time and I'm going to grab this color over here so I can bring this kind of back into the shadow as well. I'm going to change this from normal to darken as well. Shadows need to darken things, right? So it makes sense. All right, choose a nice big brush and just kind of go back and forth on that a little bit more. All right. There we go. Now, the one thing that we're going to see in, just a second here is that the shadows that we have here, you can see them, the regular shadows, they have more detail than the highlights, and it's because the highlights just bounce light back at you so you don't see as much details. But shadows actually do have quite a bit of detail, especially if they're properly exposed. So if we're just painting shadow over what was highlight, it's not going to look good because it's got no detail in it. So we need to make sure that we do keep that in mind, and we do, create some detail in the shadows. I'm going to show you guys some cool ways to do that. All right, and then spending just a little bit more time here under the dress. Cool, so we can see I'm building it up in layers and just trying to match everything to what it looked like before, and lowering the opacity so some of these things are a little farther out there. All right, that's looking good. Now, if it's not the right exact color, you can always grab colors from the other areas and paint them in, but you definitely do not want to paint these black. That's not going to look good. All right, let's go ahead and shift-click the three of those and group them together. So shift-click and then hit Command-G, put a layer mask on that group, and now I can just kind of choose to make this not visible, where our dress is. If you wanted to just grab your, layer mask from the person that we have already used, you could do that. The only problem is the layer mask does include, some detail here from the floor. See, like those shadows there, it includes those details too, which we don't want to be included in what I'm painting right now. So that's why I'm just kind of repainting this, but it's not, it's not something that you have to spend like a whole long time on. We just don't want our dress to look like it's dirty. We want a shadow, right? All right, so I'm just painting back and forth between black and white, just kind of fix up what we've got here. And this doesn't have to take, a whole long time. Just let's make that visible and invisible. We can kind of see what's going on. All right. There we go. And then I want to zoom out to about there and just see, like, does that look good? Does it not look good? And we can lower the opacity of the entire group if we need to do that, or we can go in here and do each individual layer. Like this layer, for instance, I think that, I'm just going to grab a layer mask and put it on this layer because it's too visible, like right here. So taking this and just painting it a different way should make that look a little bit better. There we go. And this is one of those things that it's just kind of like, does it have the feel that, like, does it look good? And our goal here is to make this look like 100% real. It's to make it look like no one could look at this and even tell that it's composite, like in any way. So that's the end goal, guys. So if you haven't hit that yet, then you still have a little bit more work to do. And usually it really is just a question of like how your shadows are built and things like that. You want them to be darker towards the core and lighter as they move out. And follow, as much as they can, follow the rules of light. All right, and a good shadow, to build a good shadow, it's going to take a little bit of time. Don't feel like you have to do it in 2 seconds. I'm just going to move all these down and to the left a little bit as well, because they were kind of in the wrong place. All right. There we go. And let's move that one back up. So you can see I'm moving around, but because I have this layer mask that looks like this, it's kind of guarding from my dress. Oh, I don't want to move that. I'll move these layers. And you can see it's still not going to show up on my dress, so I can move it around wherever I need to, and it just makes the whole process a little bit easier. All right. Cool. We're looking better. Now, one thing I do want to do next, we'll do this outside of the group just so you guys can see. We need to add our texture back into the shadows, like the textures and things like that are here. I don't have an accurate texture right here at this perspective, but I do have what's over here, so I'm just going to use this. Okay, we're going to hold Alt or Option, and I'm going to click here with our clone stamp tool. So I'm going to clone stamp this. I'm going to make sure that this is on current and below. And our flow, let's just bring this all the way up. Okay, so current and below basically means it's going to sample anything that's below. And I'm on a new layer, so it's, you know, it'll be able to sample whatever's on the underlying layers. There we go. And I'm just going to paint in, you know, this floor texture here. We're going to layer mask it and stuff like that, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, now this guy, I want to use this. I'm going to go ahead and I need to transform it to fit my perspective just a little bit better. But before that, I'm going to use it on a multiply layer. So let's just change this layer from normal down here to multiply. All right, and it's way too dark, obviously, but we're going to change a few things about it. We're going to change the blending options because I don't want this layer, I only want like the dark details to show up in this layer. Like, you know, shadows, I want the darker shadows to show up. So we have to change a couple things about this layer to make it look good. So let's double click on this and we'll just bring this over there and bring this guy over there. Cool. So this layer is, for the blend diff, we're going to do things with both this layer and the underlying layer. So on this layer, I don't really want it to show up where it's lighter. So we're going to grab this right side, hold Alt or Option, and click and drag from there. There we go. And I can even come down here and just say, you know, I really only want you to be visible where you're darker. Cool. And that's going to help out there. See, it's only showing up. Preview will show you the before and after. Okay, so it's only going to be visible where this layer is darker. Now, for the underlying layer, basically that takes into account everything underneath it. And for everything underneath it, I don't want it to show up where the underlying layer is lighter either, because I don't want this texture to show up in the highlights. Like, that doesn't make sense. It needs to just show up in my shadows. Highlights, you know, it's reflecting light right back at the viewer, and you wouldn't be able to see it, right? So we're going to hit Alt or Option. I'm going to click here and drag this from right to the left as well. And we're going to drag this one right over there, until we start to see something like right about here. This is the range at which you got to make a decision. If I go too far this way, we can see we're losing detail here in the actual shadow. Too far this way, it doesn't really do what we want. So we're going to do something like this and then layer mask it in. All right, so let's hit OK, and we're good to go. So we can see, let's just hit Command Z. There's the before and the after. All I did was use a little stuff with blend if, guys. That's how powerful that is. Cool. Let's put a layer mask on that, and I'm going to paint here, you know, with a black paintbrush right around those edges, just to make sure everything blends in quite a bit better. All right, so what we have now is a visible texture inside our shadow area, which is, if you guys learn one thing, you know, from this entire tutorial, it's that whenever you're making a shadow, just remember, like, it doesn't react the same way as highlights do, right? It shows up differently. So you kind of have to account for that when you're making your shadows, or it's never going to look real. So bringing that detail back into the shadows, again, is a really important step into making something like this look quite a bit more real. All right, so we have that detail in the shadows, which I definitely like. Now, I'm going to just play around with this guy a little bit more because it still doesn't look good. Let's see. To do this, I'm going to grab those 3 layers and I'm just going to kind of move them around. There we go. And one of these might be a little bit too much. You know, in other words, like, let's see, that layer looks okay. Yeah, this layer looks like it's just, maybe it's a little bit too visible, and especially towards my dress area, things like that. So doing these in layers also helps you kind of like turn things off and on. You can just kind of see, like, you know, maybe they'll work in some places, but maybe not in some others. All right. Cool, we're definitely looking better. And the shadow that's behind her, like this soft fuzzy shadow and things like that, that was already there. So we know we're probably okay with that because I didn't even make that, right? All right, and let's just use our layer mask on this group to make sure that this, you know, it's coming from her dress. Perfect. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and leave this guy outside of the group because I don't need it clipped to not be visible at her dress. And we'll do a couple more things. A new layer, and I'm gonna just zoom in here. We need to grab this dark color, and I'm just gonna bring this out just a little bit more again. The darkest of the darks, and those just get brought out a little bit. There we go. And you can change this from, you know, if you want it to be like really dark here, you can use like a multiply layer. That'll just really darken things up. I don't think we need to multiply, so I'll choose darken just because you don't want, if you don't choose darken, what's going to happen sometimes is like if you choose this color here and you start painting it over there and then you start painting it over here, see, it's darker there, but it's lightening things up over here. But like that's not what shadows do, right? Shadows darken everything. So if you change it to darken, it's basically just not going to show up in anywhere where it does darken. Now multiply is just it's gonna show up everywhere, and it's gonna multiply it, like it's gonna put it a lot darker wherever you do it. So shadows are usually better set to a darken layer rather than multiply, but if you need a multiply layer, that'll work. All right, and let's put this inside of this group because I don't want it this visible where that dress is either. So building that core, guys, and I'm just gonna kind of take these off and on and show you guys, like, you know, building this up and why you need each one of these layers and how important every one of them is. So let's just make one of these visible. You can see like that's a start, and then adding a little bit more, and then the core again. So each one of these things is pretty important, and if you don't have them all in place, you'll probably just wind up with something that just doesn't really look real, because that's the way shadows build up. And by doing them in layers, you can go in here and just change your opacities and things like that. You're going to wind up with something that looks a lot more real in the end. Cool, and I think that looks pretty good. So we're going down here. Let's just do one more layer, and there we go. I'm going to grab this color and just kind of paint a little bit over there. There we go. And we'll change this from normal to darken as well. All right, and grab my eraser tool and just erase it there. All right. If I'm not talking, you know it's like intense focus time, right? It's like, oh man, Aaron must be really focusing. This is a tough part. You're right. It is tough, but it's good. It's supposed to be hard, because if you can do hard things, then it puts you above everyone else who's not going to spend the time to learn how to do them, right? Perfect. Now the colors are a bit wrong. See, that texture really helps out, right? The colors are a little bit wrong. See, it's going back towards grayscale a little bit. We don't really want that. We want some nice color in there. So we're going to just, again, I'm going to add some colors, and I'm going to put this over top of everything. We're going to grab this colors here in my shadows that are over here, and I'm going to start painting them in. There we go. And we can change our blending mode from normal. We can go down to color, and it's going to put that color back into our highlights. Now, I generally don't really like color, to be honest. It almost never looks good. So we're going to try something else. I know I just said put it into color, because I always try color, and sometimes it does look good, but most of the time it just looks like, that's weird. So we're going to try something like soft light instead, and it's going to interact a little bit better with what's going on in our colors there. All right, so soft light does work a little bit better, but it's darkening up, like the color it's bringing, I like that, but it's darkening it too much. So if we need to change that basically the problem is the color that we chose was a little bit too dark, so it's darkening it while it's coloring it, right? So I'm going to hit Command U on this layer, and I can just lighten this up a little bit, and it should, you know, just help to bring my color in, and we can just hit Command U a bunch of times. There we go. See, you can see it's not darkening it as much because I'm just bringing this in, and I'm lower the saturation a tiny bit. There we go. So that's much better than it was before, right? Because it's bringing the actual, you know, it's bringing the colors in that we like, but it's not necessarily bringing, you know, it's not darkening the image up all. There we go. So our shadows are now, you know, much closer to the range that we actually want them to be in, which is perfect. Okay, and we have our subject right over, well, she's under this right now, and I'm going to keep moving my shadow just a little bit more. I think it needs to be shifted a little bit towards the left. The core seems to be a little bit far out from our shadow, from our subject rather. All right, and because our layer mask is in place on, you know, it's on top of the whole group, I'm not really too concerned with if that's in the right place or anything like that. Like, I can move all the things around inside the group, and my layer mask is not really going to get affected because it's you know, it's over here and I'm just moving what's inside there. So you can still move everything around inside and you should be good to go. And just turning these off and on, again, is just going to check like, okay, does this look real? Does it not look real? Perfect. And let's just put a layer mask on this, paint it away. There we go. So these two layers on the top really make a big difference. I mean, it goes from that, which just looks like a total painted shadow, into this, which you have your texture now in the shadows, which is perfect, and your color brought into the shadows as well. So those things are definitely really important. All right. Well, I'm going to look at a couple more things. We're going to go back to our models real quick, and we might come back to that shadow in a second. This is one of those things, guys, I recommend, you know, spend some time on it, and I'm just going to make it a little bit brighter. Spend some time on your shadows. You know, this is not something you guys should rush, because it just does take a long time to get these exactly right. There we go. And, you know, it's okay to kind of go back and forth between your model and your subject and your shadow and things like that. Like, don't feel like you got to get your subject 100% right and then only work on your shadow. Like, it's a real back and forth kind of thing. Even here, like, I'm going back and remember all these layers that we made before. I'm kind of changing the opacities around and, you know, just turning them off and on. Like, this layer here works for the right side, but here on the left, it's like this layer here. Let me just zoom in so you guys can see what I'm talking about. This layer, this hue saturation layer, see, it's working on the right side decently well, how I want it, but on the left, it's bringing in a color that I don't really want. Like, it looks better off than it does on, right? So we're gonna just grab a black paintbrush and paint it, you know, 10% opacity, and just kind of paint it away until we actually get what we want. So again, I'm just gonna turn this off and on. And we just see basically, you know, like, does it look good and does it look good everywhere? Those are the two things that I care about. All right, in this curves adjustment layer, you can see it's a little bit too red here. So if I double click on here and maybe give it a little bit more green, it should match my floor a little bit better. You know, not a ton, just like a tiny bit. All right. And you know what? That only looked good like right here. So I can then do what I need to do, like right here. If I need this to match a little bit better, because what we're running into basically is, if this person's in this room, the top half of them is going to reflect all of what's on the ceiling, the walls and things like that, and the bottom half is going to reflect what's on the ground. So you can't really just blanket color something, because it's, you know, it's different colors up here than it is down here, and that's why you kind of have to like color the right side differently than the left side, and the top differently than the bottom, and things like that. So, you know, there's very rarely is there just one thing that you can just hit click and it's going to look okay. That's why, you know, putting a person in their environment is tough, because it's you can't just match like one light. You got to match everything around them. All right, let's grab an adjustment layer, and I'm going to go to curves again, and I'm going to make sure to clip that. So Option Command G, and I just want this to look right about the same color, because if this is white, pretend that the ground is, you know, white too, but the ground has a color cast on it from everything that's around it. You just want these colors to be about the same. And if you have a little trouble seeing the difference between those colors, that's what these check layers are there for. So let's turn that on, and you can kind of see the differences here. Like, this guy has a little bit more, basically I'm just bumping up the saturation and then turning the luminosity later on. So you can see this has a little bit more red than it should, right? So I can counteract that by going to my green channel, clicking here, and then hitting the up arrow a couple times until that matches quite a bit better. There we go. And that does look a lot more natural there. So that's, you know, if you can't see it without all this stuff on, this stuff is just here to check. It's here to help you. All right, so here on the ground and things like that, like, it definitely looks better, right? It looks more like the right color. Maybe bring the opacity down just a little bit. But that doesn't help out like up here, because up here needs to be the red color, right? Because it's reflecting everything that's around there. So what we're going to do, again, I'm going to click on this and hit Command I to load a layer mask on there. And we're going to paint white at, you know, a flow of 10% or so, and just paint this around the bottom part of this image, which is, you know, just this dress here. So we have more of the right color on the bottom part, and we're, you know, this is not going to affect the top part. It's only going to affect the bottom. All right, there we go. And that definitely looks better. I don't know if you guys can see it here, but let's just zoom in. I tend to look at this stuff from far away, guys, and the reason I do is because it helps me to see like the big picture kind of thing. Like it helps me to see like, okay, does it look good, from far away? Does it look good from close up? And oftentimes you can tell a lot better from far away. And I'll even look at my thumbnail here. Like I'm looking at my thumbnail here and my shadow still doesn't look perfect. And so I'm like, well, okay, I need to do a little bit more work on that. And that's not a big deal. I just, I want to make sure that it does look perfect up here because this is like a way zoomed out version. If I can look at my navigator up here and it just looks, absolutely perfect, then you're usually pretty close to being good. You might need to work on a little bit of details and things like that, but the navigator really does help out. All right. So I'm turning these off and on basically just to see like what I think my problem area is, and hopefully it's going to help me out. Okay, like this shadow is a little bit too, let's just shift click on the layer mask there. This shadow is a little bit like the shape of it. It's doing right like this right now because of the layer mask that I put on. This is the layer mask that I painted on there. So I'm going to just redo this layer mask. I'm going to fill it back with white, and then I'm going to paint black at 20-30% and just kind of come in here. There we go. And that's looking much more like a natural layer mask. So the shadow under our model, like it does get really dark, right underneath our model. And I don't really think, I don't think it looks like it should that dark. And if you're worried about we got our color right here. So let's just turn this black to black and white. There we go. And you should be able to tell okay, does this in fact look right? Like, is this how we want it to look or not? And if it's not good in black and white, then you still have a lightness issue. You have a luminosity issue, not a color issue. So if it doesn't look good in black and white, it's a light and dark issue basically. All right, let's make that back black again, and I'm going to make a new layer in here. There we go. And I'm just going to grab a little bit lighter color now and paint it opacity at like 10%. And I'm going to change this now from normal to lighten, so it's not going to allow me to darken anything. So I'm choosing a lighter color in the shadow, and then I'm going to try to lighten this area up. And I'm going to do this with black and white visible. So black and white being visible here, it's not going to make whatever I paint black and white. I'm still painting with color. I just won't be able to see the color. So I'm going to paint this in, and with this, should be able to tell okay, just overall, is this what I need? Is lightening it a good thing? Was it too dark to begin with? That's basically the question that I'm trying to answer here. Was the shadow just too dark? All right, and it's not there just yet, but let me lower the opacity and see if that helps out a little bit. All right, and I think it does. I think the before and the after, I think it's just a little bit too dark to begin with. Let's lower the opacity a little bit more, kind of meet it in the middle. Yeah, I think that was an issue for sure. And let's see. I'm going to make another layer, and we're just going to change this now from normal to multiply. I'm going to use the same color here, and I'm going to see if I can build this out a little bit more, because the core is really kind of strong here, and it just kind of feathers out a little bit more than it should. So I'm going to see if I can build a core. I know I'm using total foreign words here, but basically the center of it, where it's darkest the most, is pretty dark, and then it was just getting light kind of too quick, right? So it was looking weird, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why the shadow wasn't looking perfect. And there we go. Now it's looking better. So let's put a layer mask on there and paint black at 100%. Kind of figure that out. All right, and I'm going to lower the opacity on that a bit too. Okay, so our main goal here is just to see, does it look good in black and white? Is this in fact the right shadow for this person? making it visible and then invisible again. We can just kind of check all of our layers here. And I think it's still a little bit too dark, honestly, so let's just kind of lower the opacity there. All right, cool. I think we are looking better and better. And I think we can definitely lighten the shadows here a little bit too. So I'm on this lighten layer and I can just kind of paint here to lighten that up. Let's go ahead and put this back in color and see what we look like. My shadow layer on and off again. And I'm gonna grab this color that's, you know, right about there so I can lighten some of these shadows up as well, because I think those are a little too dark there. So grabbing this color, and I'm just gonna paint here. All right, and again, we can, like, this is on a lighten layer, guys, so it's not going to, like, where my dress is, for instance, it's not gonna darken that dress up, because it's just, you know, basically it says, like, paint this color, but only be visible if it's a lighter color than, you know, everything that's around it. So that's gonna help you out. All right. Perfect. So building this up in layers, like this layer didn't even do anything. And this is, I mean, this is how I work. Normally I don't talk into a microphone while I work. I just kind of sit here and do this, and I'll make a shadow and then, you know, see, like, do I like that? Does it work? You know, do I need to take a break and come back to it? But this is, you know, this is a good way to work, because it just kind of allows you to turn things off and on and be a little bit more free with what you're doing there. And then I'm going to come in here and kind of just create like a, you know, what would be a kind of a little bit more well-defined shadow. And the reason I'm doing this is just to give it a little bit more shape. There we go. And cool. Let's go ahead and fill this with a color too. I'm going to hold Alt or Option and fill with just my foreground color, and we'll just change this from normal to multiply. All right, so give it a little bit of a shape. Nothing crazy. We want it to look like, okay, this could be real. And then what we're going to do is give it a Gaussian blur, and we can actually blur this by gradation. Like we can choose to blur it in a pretty cool way. If I hit the Q key on my keyboard, it turns into quick mask. So Q for the quick mask. And what a quick mask does, let's just turn this back to color so I can show you guys what's going on. Okay, if you are using a quick mask, basically, let's get a new layer. If I have my paintbrush and I paint, you know, just with a regular color, that's what it looks like, right? If I hit Q for my quick mask and start painting around, it's gonna look like this. And I know it looks pretty weird, but you paint black and white on this, and what it does is it creates a selection. So a quick mask, you can paint around, you can use a gradient tool, whatever you want to do with it when Q is selected. So this is quick mask. This, you can turn this off and on. When you turn it back off, whatever you painted is now a selection. Okay, which selections are really, really powerful. They'll allow you to do a lot of stuff. And so if I have a selection active now, you know, like now I can go and paint, and it'll only be visible, you know, outside my selection, which is kind of cool. So using a quick mask can be very helpful, especially if you need to do like a gradation of a blur or something like that. So let's hit Q for the quick mask. I'm going to hit G for the gradient tool, and we're going to put a linear gradient on the foreground and transparent. And I'm just going to go from here to there. Okay, so now we have a gradient that goes, you know, like it's visible here and not visible there, and, you know, fades through. So we'll hit Q again, and now we have basically a selection. So I hit Q the first time, just put a gradient on there, hit Q again, and now we have a selection. So now on this layer, if I go to Filter, Blur, and to Gaussian Blur, it's going to blur my shadow, but the cool thing is it's going to do it in a gradation. It's not going to blur this area, and it's going to gradually blur more and more as it gets further away from our subject, which is, you know, that's how shadows actually work, which is pretty cool. So here's the before and the after. All right, hit OK, and then you can just deselect that. So that just adds a little bit of blur. Now this here is just a little bit too sharp also, so I'm going to give the whole thing just a regular blur, but not nearly as visible. All right, there we go. And we're gonna hit OK and just make sure this looks good.